Okay, so chapter 1, the molecular basis of heredity, variation, and evolution. So the big question is, what is the defining feature of life? What makes us different from one another? And the answer to that, since you're taking a genetics course, is genetics. It is genetics that makes us different and distinct from one another. When organisms carry codified information, it leads to many cool observable features in one's genotype. And this information can then be changed from generations to generations due to many evolutionary forces such as natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, the bottleneck effect, and so much more that you probably learned in other biology courses. So, a phenotype is observed, whereas your genotype is the genetic constitution. I like to think of it as when the genotype is to which an allele codes for a gene, such as eye color, and the resulting phenotype can be the brown eyes that you have. So an example of one of the evolutionary forces that mentioned mutation can be seen in sickle cell anemia. And sickle cell anemia is basically when you have a blood deficiency, and it's present when you have a recessive gene of two traits that codes for it. And you must know that an allele is an alternative form of a gene, whereas differences between alleles can lead ultimately to genetic variation. And what I've written here is homozygous dominant, heterozygous, and homozygous recessive. So, genetic variation can also be expressed through differences in nucleotide sequences, which can sometimes lead to mutation and in the observed phenotype. It doesn't always usually lead to an observable difference in one's phenotype, since the many mutations that can occur to nucleotides. But you can know that when this occurs, it leads to genetic variation at the moment. So, humans have secretly been knowing genetics through selective breeding, such as over 10,000 years ago. And that was when we domesticated corn. As you guys know, Gregor Mendel, with the help of his peas, had the work of Mendelian genetics, what we're basically studying at the moment. But his work wasn't really approved at first. But thanks to three scientists, his work was realized later on, thanks to Carl Correns, Hugo de Vries, and Mr. Erich von Tiskermack. And Mendel contributed many things. One law that we know is the law of segregation. This states that when chromosomes pair, they separate in meiosis so that each gamete receives one allele per trait. And this differs from the law of independent assortment, in which it states that there is an independent assortment of alleles of different genes when gametes form. And I like to think of the difference between them through this way. So I learned that in Mendel's law of segregation, you can think of it as a monohybrid cross in which self-fertilization leads to a phenotypic ratio of 3:1, in which there's 3 dominant showing the dominant trait, and there's one that shows the recessive trait, the other type of phenotype. The other one can be for the law of independent assortment, in which you can think of a dihybrid cross, or in which 2 traits are being observed. And when a parent of a dihybrid self-fertilizes, it can lead to the phenotypic ratio of 9 to 3 to 3 to 1. So some concepts that you must know before we get into the real work of genetics are that genes are the physical units of heredity, which was made and proposed by Mendel, and that chromosomes are long molecules of double-stranded DNA wrapped around proteins, which then contain genes. So example, if we draw a chromosome, this is a homologous pair. And it is through the power of genetics and chromosomes that we can identify traits being sex-linked or, X-linked or, recessively linked, stuff like that. And so chromosomes are transmitted to identical daughter cells through mitosis, and you might have come across the acronym of PMAT. In which the P stands for prophase, M is metaphase, A is for anaphase, or T is for telophase. And there'll also be another video that describes in depth onto what mitosis actually is. And sexual reproduction, or gametes, are produced through meiosis. And gametes are known as sperm and eggs, in animals and in pollens and eggs and plants. And so that's why meiosis is also known as reduction division. And lastly, one thing that I want to talk about are that all life share a common origin on Earth, and 3 domains of life that you must know later on they'll help you are that eukarya has true nucleus and multiple chromosomes, whereas both bacteria and archaea, they don't have true nucleus and only single chromosomes are present. And so plants and animals contain mitochondria, but plants differ with chloroplasts, and chloroplasts have their own DNA, which leads into some interesting Mendelian genetic traits.